Okay, you're live.
Good morning. Welcome to Sophomore Honors English. This class consists of sophomores who are pursuing an opportunity to take the AP exam their senior year. So they're taking honors freshman, honors sophomore, and then honors junior, and then hopefully AP senior English. Today we are working on a practice response to a released AP exam question from 1996. They are responding to a question asking them to read an essay by Gary Soto, who's an American author. The essay is about him stealing a pie at the age of 6, and then they are to respond to the question as was written on the AP exam. And that is their task. So today they are making outlines of this question, and then they're going to present them to the class, and we're going to talk about it further from there. Okay. So proceed with your work.
Come on, Julie.
Same hand as because you can put programs on
Oh my God. Okay. This way. Yes.
So,
You're supposed to come up with an outline together.
me and Ian just kind of wrote down like.
Ian and I.
Sorry, Ian and I.
Yes.
And we just kind of wrote down random quotes from each.
Okay.
Quotes that symbolize something from each paragraph.
So now organize that back into a thesis statement. Good. And you might not need all this. Okay. So you might pare those down. If you want to make, you might only use 3 or 4. Okay.
I'm going to be gone Friday. So I get
Can you do this tomorrow? Because I'm going to give you an
Abbreviation symbolism.
introduction.
I wrote rule 1. Yeah, their names. That's called strategy.
That was funny. Let us write. This statement is.
That would be
This is good handwriting practice for some of you.
I always thought of happy as like okay. I'm not all of them. You could have the sentences. That whole pride was that would be great. Pride. How much pride as there are the other ones. Maybe he's envious.
I got it.
Somebody's birthday's today.
Really?
You could put a lot of the other stuff like that
Oh man. Oh wait, it's due Friday. I was like, whoopsie. I don't know where that episode was.
But it's kind of backwards.
Where's the English section?
That's why I don't really.
That's the news.
With the provision. With the provision.
Okay, but
Oh, I just put 2 P's.
Oh, you actually have your binder organized and jazz.
short or long.
Okay, then.
What's melancholy?
We got a little blonde look. 2 B's. 4 kids.
That's good.
Friends, we are going to report out in 3. What? Wait. Some groups are finished. I interpreted based on the other day that we had our outlines ready and all we have to do is copy them down today. So
Yes.
5, 6 minutes, is that that?
5.
Yes.
Okay.
5.5.
Fine. 5.5. Timekeeper. Okay. 33 seconds. That's the number. 33.
Wait, so I was like in the ocean.
I don't know. No, it doesn't. I like that. Like it is not like some squirrel. Okay, try where I cross our this is kind of 4 things that are important. The first idea
You should make a great itching powder. And then
oh,
maybe you'll get it too.
or I just like to have
Mary.
How many minutes, Justin? How many minutes?
3.5.
And use pen and
oh yeah, I
dots.
see it too. This is spectacular.
I love you.
So do that. And then, do you want to like it?
Me either. Bye, Mary and Kira.
Want to beat him up for you?
We also do. I like
He's skinny. He's a hairy guy. We're still recording. We're still recording. We recorded all of this.
It's time. They're really big right now. High pan. Should I fill in the heart?
But they're bothering.
My A has a really hard
I thought the apple, like, okay, the pie is apple pie would be good. Yeah. Can you read this? It's really bad.
ID is so weird. Oh, so sad.
Reminded him of what Jesus was.
That's how you pass the AP World Test. Just like, what would Jesus do?
Yeah, WWJD.
As soon as you look at everybody. WWJ. Oh no, that's how I got one question. Yeah.
Alright.
No, it was a selected response question. What would Jesus do? I was like, this is a freaking calculator.
My name's in your name.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Quiet down, let's roll it back. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and start. We have the person who is finished. We are our first victim. Okay, and I'm just getting the focus correct. It's not exact. Okay. Kira or Mary, one of you like to explain your outline? And what I'd like to do for the rest of the hour are see a few outlines, and then I'm going to give you 2 essays the students wrote for this test that were scored in 96. One is a 9, one is a 4. And I want to give you the scoring guide so you can see how they arrived at those scores. Okay? And we'll talk about what makes it a 9, what makes it a 4. Okay, then we're going to see some more outlines tomorrow. And I know you might feel like we're working a lot with this particular question, but this is a good question. It's an interesting piece to read, and it's very much like the kind of writing that you're going to be asked to do, especially on the OGT, where you're asked to reflect on a person in your life, a day in your life, something like that. This is an excellent example of the different things that you can do with your own writing. Is what we call in the business the mentor text. Blah, 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 right? Okay. So, Kira or Mary, one of you.
Did you go up there?
Sure. Come on up. It's not a bad place to be. I stay here all the time. Quit knocking the books over there. What are you doing?
I'm trying to put the book back and I fell over.
You can? Okay. So, would you tell us, let's all stare at Kira and Mary because they're nervous. Everyone stare. They tend to be interested. Okay. Tell us about your outline a little bit and why you organized it the way you did and why you picked the quotations you did, etc.
Well, we started out with religious symbolism because we felt that that was really one of the main focuses in the story. So we just would start with an intro, something like, religious symbolism is really important and to this piece. And then we would start out with, there's a ton of different examples, so it's kind of hard to choose all of them. But the first one, or we didn't want to go in order necessarily because the order, you want to talk first about the story and then talk about the actual religion. So Adam and Eve was kind of an intro to the whole religious standpoint. So then line 35, we didn't want to put the quote. And then then we put Jesus next because it kind of was here's an Adam and Eve story. Well, here's really what kind of was happening and why we chose Adam and Eve. And then the third paragraph, we would go into the halo of light on the baker, which was kind of the first religious little tidbit that you found in the piece. So we wanted to go how it was hinting earlier on. And then we thought the Satan flies were really, really important to the story. So we would throw that in there, how not only is Jesus in here, but Satan is also in here, which is also part of religion. And then just to conclude, we would say that religion forms his values and how he decides what's right and wrong in his life. So.
Now, hold on. Now, if you knew about the Satan flies because of this class, right?
Yeah.
You learned about Beelzebub being the Lord of the Flies. Okay. What if you did not know about the flies? What could you have put there for evil instead in 4th paragraph?
Ooh.
I think I would probably say something along the lines of the pie tin at the end. How the pie tin.
The glaring.
Yeah, it was glaring at him, kind of like making him feel guilty.
That guilt, okay.
Yeah.
I was also thinking about, he said, Adam, you got in trouble with a snake.
Yeah.
The snake is always a great symbol of evil to use. Although some of us like snakes, we can argue that when people see snakes, they get nervous.
The
for a
line about
variety
the
of
desert
reasons.
too, how you don't want to be thirsty forever.
Exactly.
That's probably a good example.
Definitely good biblical imagery to wandering in the desert.
Yeah.
Good. Questions for these lovely young ladies who made a nice outline? Okay. All right, next victims. Thank you. Just hold
We're
it.
going.
Justin? Well, come on. What are you waiting for? All right, then we'll give Zach instead.
Good luck, Zach.
Oh my God.
That's a bad one.
That's okay. That's very readable. Be kind. All right, Zach. Preach on, brother.
Alright, so the introduction usually introduces the title and the author. So when we're going back to cite it, we can just say it's in line this, and they're like, oh, well, now instead of having to write in little parentheses, blah, 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 page marks. Also do a little overview of the story, like it's about this boy and what he does in case they haven't read the story before, just give a little bit of background information, and then introduce to basically what we're going to write our paper about, symbolism. First topic, we talk about how taking. Why did you do that? Taking the pie represents Adam and Eve taking the apple. And first sin. Topic 2, we did the squirrel on the cross. It goes in that order because there's the sin, and then there's dying for our sins, and then 3, we, instead of saying just the pie tin was glaring, we took it as God as seeing his sin and saying, all right, I've acknowledged that you've done this, and so the boy understands what he's done wrong. And our conclusion is just wrapping up saying he's religious, and it shows through his writing form of symbols.
Excellent. This, now, let me say something about this outline and what Zach said. This is excellent. In fact, there's a couple things here that we didn't even talk about in class, and that in the first sin of taking the apple and the first sin of Gary said of stealing the apple pie, that had never crossed my mind particularly in that way, so that's excellent. But let me ask you this question. Zach said, do we need to talk about the story? Do we need to offer that information to the person scoring the paper? Do we need to go back and summarize what we feel the plot of the story is? And here's my fear, that if we put that in the introduction, that the person's going to get bogged down in seeing that and not get to this deliciousness here. If you'll pardon the pun. Oh, come on, that was good.
That was good.
Okay. So I would be afraid that they would get distracted at the beginning and think, this is not the best start. Okay, and I think when you see the 9 and the 4 in a few minutes, you'll see that that if you just stick with the question and stick with what you're absolutely trying to address, symbolism in this case, religious symbolism, that's good. And then saying in your conclusion or in your introduction that Soto is religious, we can definitely interpret that he has been raised in a religious house, religious schools. We know that he goes to a Catholic school. That is significant to the foundation of what you're trying to argue, so that's good. Okay, good. The squirrel is Jesus, okay. Who's next? Take that with you, just for a second. Thank you, thank you. The DiMaderos brothers would like to speak. Now, the DiMaderos brothers are quick to correct me on a variety of things, but also today, the fact that they are juniors, not sophomores. Thus, we expect junior quality work out of them if that's the game they're going to play.
All right.
All right. It's hard to do
The
things
way
backwards.
we wrote our outlines, so we
Can you
did.
do this? And look down?
Wow. All right,
There we
everyone.
go.
So the way we did our outline is I put the thesis, or like the thesis statement we would use for our. So we use this religious symbolism in religion not only to tell everyone of his sins, but to talk about the piety of others. Piety.
Piety.
I see
Good,
wrong.
huh?
But,
And they thought of that all on their own.
Okay. And the nature of sin itself, because at the end of the paragraph, at the end of the first paragraph, he says, "But boredom made me sin." And there's an expression that says, "The devil makes work for idle hands." So, and that came true because he did end up stealing the pie because he had nothing to do and he was kind of hungry. And so yeah, we also talk about how apple is the forbidden fruit that he takes, and it is the first sin, and it's kind of, and he alludes to Adam and Eve and how he would be afraid to be thirsty, but later in the piece, he says that he is thirsty, so it's like he has been eternally damned for his sins. And so, and then with the stifling heat with and the kitchen stifling with heat, lunatic flies. Yeah, so the kitchen is like hell. And Beelzebub is the lord of the flies, but it's believed that there are 7 princes of hell for each cardinal sin that there are, and he is one of the, Beelzebub is a prince of hell. And it was either between greed or gluttony, which he does both, since he's greedy, since he doesn't share the pie, and he's gluttonous because he takes the pie and he just like digs in with his hands. And so it was organized in like the sin and the piety, so it's like the good news, bad news thing, and like the contrast between like his wickedness and the goodness of others, like highlights the sin itself. So like to be pious is to be like religiously good and morally good. So like the squirrel is the crucified Jesus looking at him. So it's like a reminder that he died for his sins, but we still sin anyway. So he's like defying Jesus, and like the baker's innocent and pure with like his big gold halo above his head. And to be pious, like they believe that the harder you worked, the more likely you were to get into heaven, and you avoid sin by working. So his mother, like tackling the mountain of potatoes, and everyone is omniscient, like so everyone knows that he stole the pie even though they weren't there. So it's like everyone collectively is kind of like God because they're all knowing. And yeah, that part I just ran out of room. I'm like, go ahead.
Now, when I look at this, though, I think that there's too much here. So this is excellent. I mean, too much good stuff. To write about, like you get like, if you really developed this, you get about right here and the time would be over. So you might just pick 2 of these, like 2 things for each, and that would be great. There's lots of good examples here. The mother is hardworking is excellent for piety and being pious. And then, of course, I think you could just stick with the mother and the banker. That would be great. Just to keep it really simple, too. That would be excellent. Does anybody else have a suggestion? I like piety and pious. And again, they thought of that.
I was going to say, we constructed our thesis like that because on the AP test, they don't want to like go through your thesis and have to like decipher what you have to say.
That's exactly right. They want you
in
to
your
like,
thesis, you say what you're going to say in first, second, and third paragraph. That's it.
they do. They really want you to, here it is. They do. That's good. Good. Very nice. Piety. Good. Who's next? Let's hear one more today. We'll hear another one tomorrow.
The backs,
The
they're
Matai,
not
Jason, and
there.
Gemma.
So like when I step in the hands, they just
Oh, they can, huh? Now I'm nervous. Gemma, they have conceded that you are the winner of the hand raising race. Okay. Can I use that one more time? Conceded, is that okay?
Great job.
It's basically conceded. It's nice. Oh, nice. Okay, Rachel and Gemma, let's stare at them because they love to study from a big group. It's their favorite thing.
Okay, so I did a brief introduction, and for paragraph 1, we wanted to focus on the writing device of repetition and how throughout the story they repeat a lot about the shadows of angels and how he keeps on hearing the plumbing, and that goes on throughout the story. Also, the way when, from the beginning to the end, they talk a lot about guilt after he steals the pie. And so when he's on the way back home, he comes across his neighbor, and even inanimate objects seem to be staring at him, and it makes him nervous. And that's just guilt repeating throughout the story. Yeah, and then there's some repetition for the light from the grocer's head and the sunlight and paragraph 2.
We did symbolism too, and cross-eyed Johnny, we thought that he was like a symbol for like an old wise man because he tells him saying that his hands are dirty, and we also like compared that to how in the beginning he like put his cleanest hands to fly, in the end he's like your hands are dirty, and also how he watches his fly, cross-eyed Johnny does, and then like he hobbles away. So we thought that symbolized like an old man, but we weren't exactly sure how that what religion. And then we talked about how this girl is Jesus, and how the apple got in trouble and got it.
And for our last paragraph, we wanted to talk about imagery, just the word choice of the writer. He uses a lot of visual words about eating the pie, like golden covered slop. Right.
So imagery and diction.
Yeah. So just how that helps the reader visualize what's going on in the story.
Let's talk about Cross-Eyed Johnny for a minute, because thank you for bringing him up as somebody we didn't talk about the other day. Cross-Eyed Johnny is actually a significant character here in the story because Cross-Eyed Johnny is apparently cross-eyed. Okay. Now, we have an excellent visual. We have an excellent image of what we perceive to be as cross-eyed. Okay. We also know that in ancient times, biblical times, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, if people were visually impaired, that they were thought to have special powers of vision, like clairvoyancy, fortune tellers. Think of Tiresias, okay, the blind prophet. So having someone be visually impaired here gives us this great image. We also have the reference to special powers of being able to see the future, okay? So we could talk about that easily. And of course, we have the name Johnny, which is a very common name given to people who have like an unknown identity. Like when they say you can't identify someone, they call them John Doe. But the name John, of course, has great biblical significance also. Okay, so we've got a lot going on here with Cross-Eyed Johnny. He climbs the roof, he falls. The word fall is critical because of the fall of Adam and Eve. The fall hurt him. He's hobbling away. I love the old man reference, like the wise old man, because that fits nicely. But also, is he damaged from watching this sin? Some religious text would say that if you watch a sin happen, you have sinned also. So there's a lot with Cross-Eyed Johnny that we could use for sure. Okay. There was something else, but my train jumped the track. I was thinking about numbers. Okay. Thank you, girls. Thank you.
Ta-ta then.
Okay. Let's thank these nice young ladies.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to see some more clients tomorrow. Tomorrow for our class, we're going to have about half our class with Gary Soto, and then we're going to introduce our next project. Okay, so we'll plan on that. What I want to give you right now is what's called a scoring guide. This is the actual scoring guide that was used for this question. Okay, now how this works is there are, I don't know how many hundreds of people hired to score a test like this. But before they can do that, they have to arrive at a scoring guide. They have to decide the scores of essays between a 0 and a 9. So what does a 9 look like? What does an 8 look like? What's a 7? Etc. Okay? And those are called anchor papers. So when I get hired, for example, to score the SAT from home, they email me the set of anchor papers. Here's what a 9 looks like, 8, or whatever the scoring system is. And then I have to measure the essays I see against those. So there's a group of people that get together in a room, they lock the doors, and they throw a bunch of essays at them and say, you decide, and then they run. Okay, so they have to fight it out, what's a 9, what's an 8. And I've done this process before. We used to do this with the Ohio Writing Project, where there'd be like 65 of us in a room, and they would give us a set of like 50 papers, and we would have to decide what's a 6, what's a 5, what's a 4, and it is so incredibly difficult to make those decisions, to get 60 people to agree on what is an A paper. Okay, that being said, this is the actual scoring guide for this question that you just answered. Okay, so I want everybody to have one of these. And then we're going to look at a 9 and a 4. What was actually scored as a 9, what was actually scored as a 4. Okay, so you can get an idea of what they're looking for, what the people do right, what they do wrong, etc. Okay? Now, this test is different than the OGT because they are expecting you to do more right than wrong, but they're looking for what you do wrong. The OGT looks for what you do right. It's a different style of grading in a lot of ways. They look for what you do right, but they notice when you do stuff wrong.
Is a 4 really bad or is that average?
Okay, is a 4 really bad or is it average? Well, a 4, excuse me, by the time you leave this program, the results that we see, the results that we expect are 7s. Okay, that's what we expect you to get. That's what we see people get that have gone through 4 years of our program. Okay, at least a 7. Okay, I would never expect a 9. Simply because if they give you a 9, they have to write a letter Y, so they don't give those out very often. Okay, so the scorers are very careful about 9s. All right, nonetheless, they still have to decide what looks like a 9. Okay, so the scoring guide looks like that. There's various descriptions as to what needs to be included to get a certain score. Obviously, if you leave it blank, you're going to get a 0. Okay, if you make some attempt at something, you're probably going to get a 1, etc. You can see from there. Okay, we're not going to do a lot with this scoring guide today. I just wanted you to have it so you can kind of see what they're looking for when they score a question like this. Okay, so what I want to do first is look at the 9. Okay, and on the paper, I have a 9 and I have a 4. The 9's in the front, 4's in the back, or however you look at it. Okay, so let's look at the 9 first. Okay, and then talk about what makes this a 9. And help me remember that our bell is at 10:11 today. It is this day. You want to leave that badly?
Not this class.
Okay, you're just in a hurry to get your next class, right? Something exciting is going on.
No, I saw you.
Okay. All right. Mr. Mogg, no need to put our head down in despair. We'll come back tomorrow, don't worry.
Wait a second. There are 7 paragraphs here.
Okay, now, let's just look at the 9. Now let's think about what we talked a minute ago. Well, we've got a person who is grading, I don't know, 100 of these in a day, maybe 200. I don't know what the hours are, what the time frame is sometimes. But we talked about really making an impression right from the start. Okay, so let's hear the introduction. Gary Soto recreates the feelings and experiences of his guilt-ridden self at age 6. He evokes feelings of guilt universal to all as he describes his personal experience with the sin of stealing. The reader can empathize with young Gary on an extremely precise level due to Gary Soto's creation and uses of contrast, repetition, pacing, eloquent word choices, and imagery so real the reader can taste it. Really? Can you imagine just like pulling this out on the test?
Did someone really write this? Was like
This is an actual answer given on the test day, and they got a 9. Okay, now. So not only do we have this person saying, I'm going to talk about imagery, let me give you a little bit of imagery with so real the reader can taste it.
wow.
Okay, so when we think about the devices that we're writing about, you have to remember that you know how to use those too. If you can identify them, you can use them, right? And don't be afraid to do that. That's a good risk to take, okay? All right, now he says, he or she, let's just say he for the sake, says he's going to talk about contrast, repetition, pacing, diction, and imagery, okay? Someone a minute ago said there's 7 paragraphs here. Well, if you say you're going to talk about 5 things, then you need to have 5 body paragraphs. And then an introduction and conclusion. Now 5 plus 2, last time I checked, was 7. Okay, this is the opportunity for you, when you see the question, to look at the clock and budget your time. Okay, because maybe you can't get to all that. All right, so just something to consider. Okay, so let's keep reading. Soto does some rather unique contrasting, giving it a youthful style much like that of a 6-year-old boy. We can feel his guilt as he's finished his apple pie and contrasts his sin of stealing to the original sin of Adam and Eve and their apple, a much larger sin, to compare himself with. We see this in contrast. We see in this contrast how his guilt is expanding to a much larger and broader scale. Gary Soto also uses repetition of phrases in such a way as to evoke images of guilt. The repeated image of the shadows that individuals young Gary sees implies he's feeling he's being watched. The shadow is what he sees, the implied lurking and deviance of shadows as opposed to actually seeing the angels themselves, a much more pleasing experience. The repetition of the howling plumbing young Gary interprets as being God's voice. The guilt is seen here because the plumbing is howling, implying a ghost-like quality and the haunting. Okay, etc. All right. Now, you'll notice that there are no quotations from the text in the first 3 paragraphs. That's okay, as you can see by the reward of this score. But there's still examples provided, just not direct quotations. So this person carefully used that rather than quotes, okay? Okay. Now, we're going to go back to this a little bit tomorrow, but before we go today, I do want to look at the 4, just so you can hear that contrast of what this sounds like. So again, they have already determined what a 9 looks like, what a 4 looks like, what a 0 looks like, etc. Okay, so let's hear the 4. Gary Soto writes this to proclaim his first encounter with sin. His imagery shows negative feelings toward the self. His major contrast of heaven and hell foreshadow his ending lesson of his sin. His paranoia also reflects that of a young guilty child. All 3 writing techniques help recreate this guilt-filled moment of Gary Soto. The image of his sweet tooth gleaming and the juice of guilt wetting my underarms gives a negative, childish image. The fact that he shoved the stolen pie into the cavern of my mouth gives his own mouth negative connotations. The images of his idea of heaven and hell being repeated show a true fear, especially for hell. The howling plumbing underneath the house is juvenile in the sense that it compares a scary noise to hell. The parallel being drawn and repeated not only gives an accurate idea of how Gary perceives the act he has done, also, Gary's paranoia is that of a young guilty child. The way he puts the driver knew, Mrs. Hancock, she knew, my mom knew, together is so fast and gives such a strong image of this frightened little boy. The juvenile nature of the character created is reflective of Gary Soto's use of imagery, repetition, and diction.
Miss Mann?
Okay, hold on. Now, you have to understand something about the level of this test, is that when you could hear me reading according to the punctuation, and you could hear the fragments, right? The sentence fragments, but they were not purposeful. Okay, a purposeful fragment is one thing, and an accidental fragment is altogether different. Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say, is this really like a 4?
They scored this as a 4. Now, there are some good things here, but if you go back to the scoring guide and read the scoring guide, what did they determine is a 4? Okay, this might fit into that category. A 4 on an essay on the AP exam does not mean a passing score. Okay, so, well, what's passing varies. Here's why. The 3 essays are 55% of your score. The multiple choice section is 45% of your score. So everything is relative to what you get on individual sections. Okay. Obviously the advice would be is to do your very, very best on every section. Okay. But I'm not here to scare you about the test. I'm here to say this is what they're looking for. This is something we're going to work toward. We're not doing this right now. We might be a 4 right now, and that's actually pretty good, really. I'm not going to forgive you for all these fragments, but we can work on that, right? Okay? DiMadero's brother.
Isn't the AP test the 5, 4, so isn't that based off of the top score that the AP test receives?
Then there is some kind of an averaging, and you're placed amongst the people. It's a formula that I don't know much about.
So that's what you...
Because I deal with this, like this level of it, getting you ready for the writing technique of it. Yeah. There's a lot of calculation into what your score ends up being. Okay. So when we come back tomorrow, we're gonna look at this one more time, finish up our outlines. You guys all have your notebooks back. Okay. Use your notebooks or keep them in a safe place, depending on your structure. Take your outline with you, bring it back tomorrow. And we're going to put our desks back for our next class.